The latest Eurozone bailout in Cyprus has highlighted a growing bitterness between Europe's poor southern economies and the continent's richer northern economies. Joining us now to detail what this mistrust means for the future of the Eurozone, in Albany, New York, Adam Lerrick. He's scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. And with us here in our studios, Costas Douzinas. He is professor of law and director of the Birkbeck Institute for the Humanities at the University of London, UK. And we welcome Adam, you in New York. And Costas, good to have you here in our studio. I want to start by just reading something, Costas, that you wrote in The Guardian last month. It goes like this: resistance against austerity and injustice is again in the air. In Italy, the overwhelming anti-austerity vote has shaken the parties committed to the Berlin orthodoxy. Large marches and rallies in Portugal and Spain have undermined governments and policies, and a new push for anti-austerity unity is emerging in Britain. Finally, the Cypriot government agreed to the unprecedented haircut of bank savings, but was forced to renege after MPs of all parties, under pressure from the public, voted against it, and ruling party MPs had to abstain. This was the first formal rebuff of austerity, something that the obedient governments of Southern Europe had not dared. The words democracy and referendum create panic in the corridors of Brussels. But the symbolic value of a small nation rejecting the initial troika blackmail and protecting the savings of ordinary people is immense. The European debate has concentrated on the protection of savings. The protection of our democracy is perhaps more important. Okay, Costas, that sets the table for the discussion to come. So tell us why you think the anti-austerity argument is carrying the day in the South.
Over the last 20 or 30 years, a particular type of economic ideology or idolatry ruled the world. I mean, certainly the advanced world, here North America and Western Europe. It used to go by the name of neoclassical economics or monetarist policy. Now it has become neoliberalism. And that type of economic policy has failed at all levels. It has failed according to its own internal criteria. So, for example, in Greece, while only 3 years ago the IMF and the EU were predicting that today Greece would have gone back to the markets and that growth would have started again, Greece this year is experiencing a -6 growth, a total depression of 26% over 4 years, a 30% unemployment rate, and a 60% youth unemployment rate. So they failed. The IMF has accepted that their own calculations, the so-called fiscal multiplier, was totally wrong, underestimated the effect of austerity on growth by a factor of 3. So at all levels, even according to their own criteria, have failed. But then if we move to...
Well, okay, hold that for a second. I'm going to hold that there because I want to put that to Adam. Adam, would you share the view that the verdict on austerity is in and that it has failed?
Oh, absolutely not. First of all, just stepping back at one point, the Cypriot rejection of the first proposal had nothing to do with austerity. This rejection was not linked to any cuts in spending, any cuts in government benefits, any cuts in wages. It was simply a question of whether there would be a tax placed on depositors in the banking system. That was rejected, first because it imposed losses on ordinary Cypriot citizens who had small accounts, and it was rejected also by the business community because they were frightened that it would scare off their model of being an offshore banking center for the large accounts. So the Cypriot rejection of the first proposal had nothing to do with austerity. Costas has raised a different point, which is, are the austerity measures working in the other countries? And the answer is, they are working. It's just that the IMF and the Eurozone has greatly underestimated the time required to make the necessary adjustment. The problem in Europe has nothing to do with deficits and has nothing to do with debts. The debts can be easily written down, the deficits can be easily cut. The problem is that Southern Europe, the citizens of Southern Europe, expect a standard of living that their productivity cannot deliver. These people are going to have to be 20 to 40% poorer than they were 2 or 3 years ago. And that is a long, painful process that's going to take at least 5 and probably close to 10 years in order to achieve the necessary deflation.
Okay, let me put that to Costas. Austerity is working, it's just taking longer than people expected to.
I agree with Adam. Indeed, it's not about debt and deficit. Indeed, if anyone wants deficit and debt today, it is capital and the capitalists. Because precisely the way in which Southern Europe consumed the German goods over the last 20 or 30 years. I mean, 60% of the balance of trade of Germany is, of course, with the rest of the EU, the largest part with Southern Europe. It was precisely through loans that were given to people. The kinds of subprime mortgage problem in America was, in Europe, the subprime consumer problem. Given loans, debt-fueled consumption, and it was on that basis, on that totally wrong model of the European Union and the Eurozone, that the German prosperity and the Northern European prosperity was built. So just to finish, I think it is totally wrong and indeed a bit surprising to say that somehow over the last 2 years, the Northern Europeans discovered with feigned astonishment that the Southerns were living above their means. They knew that all along. They knew that all along. The loans that are given to Greece and the other countries in the so-called bailout agreements are loans that are being directly paid back to the German and French banks.
Okay, let us show some photos here, which some of which are fairly disturbing. These are from anti-bailout demonstrations in Cyprus, and some of them, as you will see, depict Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, as a Nazi. And perhaps, Adam, I'll go to you on this first. Why is Germany being singled out for this very hostile reaction?
Well, because Germany is viewed as the leader of the Northern Europeans. Germany is the largest economy in Europe. Germany is the country that is bankrolling all these bailouts. Germany is the country that is trying to drive Europe to the next level of integration, where there will be central fiscal control. So clearly, Germany is viewed as the bad cop. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't other countries, the Netherlands, Finland, Luxembourg, Austria, and Denmark outside of the Eurozone.